Hello, everybody here in Israel, and hello to Ellen Kouchner out there in Maine, US. So glad to have all of you viewers, and especially you, Ellen, here at our virtual icon. We're going to have a lovely conversation. I hope it will be lovely. We're going to have a conversation, and we're hoping to be lovely. And if you lot have any question, please be very, very free to write it below our heads at the question box, which is not the chat. We will read the chat eventually, but we're not seeing it right now. If you want to ask any question, please write it down at the question box. If you want to write it in Hebrew and want me to translate it in English, go ahead, write it in Hebrew. We will start with a conversation momentarily, and we will stop for questions about between 10 to 15 minutes before the end. So we have a lot of time for questions. If we won't have any, you will have to put up with me and my questions, because I've prepared a lot of them. And if you want to know anything, go ahead and ask your question.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. I promise you, my English is worst, and I'm here hosting. And well, that's a good point to say that
העברית שלי très triste.
You can say העברית שלי, which is gorgeous. Now, that will be a very good point to say that I'm sorry, English is not my first or my second language, and I tend to mix it up when I'm excited, and I'm very excited to have Ellen Kouchner, one of my favorite authors, here with us at the virtual icon, hoping to see you again in real life icon very soon. Ellen is one of my personal favorite authors. If you read Hebrew, you can find Sword Point or Al Khod Saif in Hebrew, published by Graph Publishing. I had the extreme privilege to get to know Ellen through my previous job at Graph Publishing, where I was the head of digital marketing. And I can tell you that beside of her being a wonderful, wonderful author, did I mention she's one of my favorites? And I really, really recommend to all of you to go read any kind of book and all the stories that Ellen was generous to mention that can be reached through her bibliography in her site. So go ahead, read, listen, and experience this wonderful author yourself. I can also promise you that she's one of, and I've been in charge of guest of honor for a long time in Icon, and I can tell you personally, this is one of the nicest of them.
Uh-oh.
Ella, do you have anything to say before I start bombarding you with questions?
I love talking about myself, so I know I'm going to enjoy the next 45 minutes. And I love being back at Icon. It's funny. My wife Delia and I spent a year living in Paris from 2017 to 2018. And when we left France, because we couldn't stay any longer, we came to Icon because we didn't want to go home. And it was our first time at Icon, and both of our books had just been published in Hebrew. And we had such a good time. It was her first time ever in Israel and my first time in Tel Aviv. And we just loved it, felt really at home there, loved meeting all the people at Icon, made a lot of new friends, including you, and thought, well, we have to come back. We have to come back. Little did we think we'd be coming back on Zoom. But this is great. This is better than nothing. So thank you very much for asking us to join you tonight.
And we'll absolutely love having you. We would love having you in real life, but we are grateful for you to join us in your Sunday afternoon. Is it afternoon?
It's 3 o'clock here, 3:04 here in Maine.
So spending all your early afternoon with us, both reading and having this conversation. Now, I would like to take this conversation towards a few points that I personally find very I had a good sentence and now I've got it ran away, that are very unique to you as an author. When I first met you, and first met your books, and first met you through your books, I fell in love with Sword Point, that I was shocked to learn was out at 1987. And the fact that shocked me so much was that it was one of the first books I've ever read that had very matter-of-fact gay relationships. And there was so non-issue that I was both, I loved the way that it was just a thing that is real in that world, which is what I would like to see in many more books. And I loved it, how it was so much non-issue. Now, we have discussed it twice in the past, I think, in a panel about gay relationships in books, and in another conversation, if I remember correctly. So I would like to hear you again briefly about that. And then I will go and bombard you with other questions about things unique to Ellen Kouchner as a writer.
Okay. Well, the first answer I have for that really is historical. Between the time a book gets finished and the time a book is published, 2, even 3 years can pass, because you have to find someone who's going to read it, buy it, and then the publication process takes almost a year, sometimes more. So I finished the novel, I think, in 1985, and this was just before the AIDS pandemic in New York.
Oh, right.
And I was living in New York at the time, and it was really a golden era in New York City for gay life, particularly for gay male life. I mean, in some ways, they were the cultural norm of New York City. And I was young, I was in my 20s, I was impressionable. And I think without even realizing it, I absorbed that. This is something I realized many years later, not something I was aware of at the time. But I think, and I'm always surprised to hear that what people love about this book is that it's just taken for granted. And I do think some of it is just, that's the atmosphere that I was in then. I didn't do it to make a point, but I also think that's just how I thought about the world. Almost everybody in the book is bisexual. And my view of the world is that almost everybody is or could be. And I think whenever I teach fantasy or talk about the underpinnings of fantasy, my feeling is that a really good fantasy novel always embodies, literally embodies, turns into physicality the author's truest beliefs and feelings. C.S. Lewis, it's probably a bad thing. C.S. Lewis, really believed deeply in a very odd sort of Christianity. And it's in every single page of everything he writes. He was possibly more conscious and more deliberate. But Tolkien, of course, just really loved the land. And even though you don't think of necessarily the Lord of the Rings as being deeply suffused in love of the land, and if you ever go to England, you say, oh my God, this is Middle Earth, you know that was such a powerful feeling he had as a human being, that not only does it come across in the Lord of the Rings, but I was a kid when Lord of the Rings was first becoming very popular, and it kind of sparked in America, an entire ecology movement of people who wanted to love trees the same way that Tolkien did. And I frankly, you can tell a merely okay fantasy book by the fact that there's no deeply held belief at the core of it, other than that the person likes fantasy and thinks it's fun to read.
So talking about genre, that gets us a very good segue to my second question, that deals with swords points genre. Because it is fantasy by imagining differently our history. It takes a point of medievalish Renaissance history, I think. I know my history were not as much as I know.
I'll stop you right now and say that this is not the case. A lot of people think it is.
Okay.
But to avoid you having to think of things, I will tell you that it is a mixture. It's a mixture of all of my favorite periods of Western European history.
I thank you so much, because I know I'm a bit ignorant in history, and I was mad at myself for not pinpointing the era. So it's a sort of a mixture of Renaissance and other cultures, and but it's not fantasy as in other
no
pure fantasy books. It has another genre, and I don't think I've ever seen this genre before. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
I think it's unique.
It was almost the first, maybe the first, I'm not absolutely certain, but within the 5-year period, there were very few books that had the same feeling as that book. They started to come out around then, and I know some of the people who wrote them. Mine was just published a little before theirs, but they were writing theirs the same time I was writing mine, because we were a new generation of fantasy writers. The previous generation were all influenced heavily by Tolkien. And Tolkien was the writer who said it has to take place in a medieval feeling, and it has to be about a huge world important quest. And it takes place in the country mostly. And people tried to imitate that. And my generation, we were growing up in cities, not growing up. We grew up in the suburbs, but we were living in cities because cities were cheap and cities were exciting and cities were dangerous. And so you started to get fantasy written in cities about people in cities who didn't know the country very well, didn't like it very well. And there were a few other influences as well, as including the very mannered lifestyle of Jane Austen, where the way that someone says a sentence, what is in that sentence, is more important than whether they can find the magic ring. And so we had a mixture of Tolkien and all of these other influences, including a lot of what at the time was called urban fantasy. So that was not just me, but I was living in New York City back when the whole city was a very dangerous place to be, and we loved it. And I tried to put that into my novel, that the city that I was living in. And that's what I wanted to write. I had trouble selling it because people weren't sure what it was. And the hardest thing about it was not the homosexuality, but the fact that it had no magic. Now, and I kind of hoped that it wouldn't be a fantasy novel, that I would get published as a great literary novel that had no magic. But in the end, the best place for it was the fantasy world, partly because it got really famous as being the fantasy novel with no magic. And since then, there have been a fair number of books written like that, so much so that they're called historical fantasy. Some of them have magic, but they're set in real periods in the real world that didn't have magic. A lot of stuff set in the Jane Austen period, a lot.
Yeah, I've read some of them.
But other periods as well. It takes a certain amount of nerve to do it without magic, but it's just, I write what's in my heart, and it's hard to sell, and then people love it.
So I think you have answered my next question. Was the genre deliberate, or did it just flow from the story?
No, it was just what I wanted to write. It was in my head, it was in my heart. And why spend your time doing anything that isn't your own truth? Someone else can do their truth. You should do your truth.
That's a very good thing to remember. I remind you people that you are free to ask any kind of questions, and I will, for between sections, I will stop and look at if we've got a new question, which we haven't yet. So I'm going to jump to my next set of questions about Tramontane. Now, I think most of our viewers have read Riverside's first book, which is Sword Point, which you talked about. That is the opening for a series of books and stories about Riverside, the settings, the city, the dangerous and beautiful and complexity of Sword Point. And when I first read Tramontane, I was completely ignorant about it being unique in its writing and publications. And then I've learned how unique it was, and I was in awe. Do you want to explain what happened there?
Yeah, it was not my idea, but Tramontane was one of the first creations published online only, and also in audio, but not in print, by a brand new company that a friend of mine started called Serial Box. And he came to me and said, I'm trying to create a series of stories, interconnected stories that read like a television series, like a really good Netflix television series, where every week the story continues, the characters continue, and over time, you know, the stories create a full season arc, but they each take about an hour to read, so that it will be the equivalent of watching a really good Netflix series. And I love your books, and would we do one set in your world, in the Swords Point world? And I thought about it and then thought, oh, that could be kind of fun. And they were written very quickly because they had to come out every week. And so the idea was that you got other writers together with you, and you sat in the equivalent of a television writing room, planning the season, planning each story and the arc of the season. So I very carefully chose writers whose writing I admired and who I knew really loved Swords Point already. So I knew that they would have the heart for it and kind of think it was fun to write sort of professional fanfics set in my world. So we ended up doing 4 seasons of it. And the writers, some of them stayed the whole time. Some of them did 1 year, some did 2 year. We had so much fun. So much fun. We literally, my friend who created the series flew everybody in from all over. And we literally sat in my living room for 2.5 days, eating bagels and chocolate and with a big whiteboard and planning the whole thing out. So I said, all right, I'm still writing novels set in that world about the characters and their friends. So it can't take place. We can't start adding new material after Swords Point because that's mine and I don't know what I'm always going to do with it. So this has to take place before Swords Point. Awesome. And we wanted to connect it to Swords Point. So we thought, all right, let's do the characters in Swords Point, the previous generation. Like the characters in Swords Point are babies or children, and the main characters, but particularly the Duchess Tramontane, who's a very important character in Swords Point, is a young woman in Tramontane, and it becomes her story of how she becomes this powerful woman when she starts as a sort of frightened young bride. And so we went with her story. And so there are a few other adult characters in Swords Point who come as younger people, make little appearances, some important, some not. Our problem was we created some characters that we loved so much, and we knew we had to kill them because they couldn't be alive in 10 years when Swords Point started. So it was sad to kill them. But on the other hand, we got to give them beautiful deaths, which is always fun when you're a writer. And also it opened up my world tremendously, so that I had writers like Elia Dawn Johnson, who's an African-American woman studying in Mexico, who studied pre-colonial Mexican culture and food in particular. So she created a character from that world.
I love Coco. Sorry,
she's the best. We all love her. Yeah, she's a wonderful character. And the reason that we thought we could suddenly have people from other countries coming in there and people who were not white is literally Elia and I were just having tea, and we suddenly said, everyone in the Riverside world drinks chocolate, but where does it come from? They don't grow it. There must be people from some kind of, Mexican-like or South American-like place that brings them the chocolate, and they've got to be rich because, it's a rare thing that everybody wants. So we created this entire culture of traders who are from this imaginary, not Mexico place, living in the city where they have a little compound where they keep to themselves, they speak their own language, they don't marry out, and they make money trading. You could say they were inspired by Jews in Amsterdam as much as anybody, as much as Mexicans. So we just kept thinking of new things like that. And in the novel that I'm currently writing, which takes place 30 years after Sword's Point, I have put them in it, not the characters, because they're all dead by now.
The civilization.
But there's a baby born in Tremontaine who is now the head of the family in the novel that I'm writing. And I don't think she's ever going to come on stage, but she gets referred to a couple of times. So I was really grateful to my fellow writers for helping to create new things for the world for me. So that's the story of how that happened. And I do want to say it's still available online and in audio. And if your English isn't great, you can probably just run it through Google Translate because it's all online. I'm saying
that would be, I would say it is a crime against your lovely English. I just love your language. So I just want to go over the points and go a bit deeper in each of them. So that was a serial, meaning people would listen every week to a new episode, and they didn't have the other episodes available.
Initially, yes.
Kind of like a TV show. It was written to be recorded, like we say, digital first. It was written audio first. So it wasn't written audio first. It was written both at the same time. As a story.
Yeah.
Okay. But did you, I suppose I'll ask about it. And it was a collaboration of, I've counted 7 writers. Mm-hmm. Wow.
I'm trying to remember. In the first season, I think it was 5 writers every season, including me. I think it was 5 every season.
So you already started answering some of my questions, but I really want to go a bit deeper about first, it's being a serial. So as you explained, you had the equivalent of a TV writer's room, right? Being a real writer's room or a novel writer's room. Did you have a sort of like, were you the showrunner or were you in charge of arcs of the Bible?
Yeah, it was kind of a collaborative thing. I didn't want to be the showrunner because that was a lot of administrative work and I'm not really a very good administrator. And I wanted to be free to just do the creative stuff. So I had an assistant who I had worked with before on other projects who's very good at thinking in terms of television, and I'm not. So she kind of did all the practical things and kind of keep track of but I would read everybody's. So we would come up with a plot line. We would decide who got to write each story. And then we had all these other things in between where you would write an outline for the story and we all read it together and said, oh, you're having the first kiss in your story. I wanted to have the first kiss in my story. Would you consider just having them get really close and then not kiss, through things like, wait, they're finding the jewel in this. I thought it wasn't going to happen. I thought it was going to happen before that, so we worked out all the details. And then people would write drafts and then I would read them. I guess we all read them, but I would read them thinking I kind of had to keep the world in my head. And that wasn't that hard for me. So I did that. Well, actually, no. Well, we had an editor do it the first year. We had editors. It was a lot of people. It took a lot of people to make this work. And everybody was very good at what they did. And I was the one who read for continuity the second year. And then I asked one of my writers to do it the third and fourth years. But we all kind of kept an eye on each other. It was very collaborative. It was like theater in a way.
It sounds very much like television writing, I must say.
It was.
And I think I've met your assistants online when we tried to set up an online interview with you during the writing of, I don't remember, the first or second season of Tremontaine. And I remember Rani saying, you've got to talk with Ellen's assistant. She's Ellen's Na'Mi. And I was, okay.
That was somebody else, but she was phenomenal. Yeah, she was really great.
Okay, so that's another assistant. Okay, anyway, enough about it. So you knew that you had set up that timeline and there's different breakup. And did you have any influence about other people's stories, or is it just, okay, this has to happen and this has to happen, and go ahead, write, and I'm not going to interfere with it?
No, we all did it together. No, okay. I was in every meeting. I had to approve everything, but we all had to approve everything. But if there was an argument, I would win the argument because it was my world. So
you were the Duchess.
But sometimes I lost the argument. Occasionally I would lose the argument, and I would let me lose the argument if it was just about, the characters. So, but basically I really felt like I had a responsibility to my readers of the books that Tremontaine was going to be an Ellen Kushner approved version of the history of my city.
So it sounds like an extremely unique experience. Can you tell us a bit more about the experience for you as a writer, who I suppose used to write in front of a page or computer? How was it like to collaborate?
For the Tremontaine series specifically?
Yeah.
It was alternately frustrating, exhausting, infuriating, and more fun than we've ever had. It was writing in a community. It was like playing a game together with your friends. Do you know what is what's it called? Well, you have a sort of a chat board. All the businesses have them now, Slack.
Yeah.
We have a thing called Slack. So we had Slack boards for every story. And within each board, there would be like Slack for each character. And so if someone had invented a character, they sort of owned that character. And we would write and say, does your character wear this kind of clothing? Or would they ever do such and such? And people were hilariously funny when we talked about the plot. There was little bits of it I saved because I couldn't put anything out in public at the time because it was all spoilers, but I really kind of want our Slack chats to be published someday. I can't think of a good example, but partly because just some of our writers are very funny people, or we would make fun of the characters, but it was always toward the purpose of getting a really great story out. So for me, it was easy in that I knew the characters, I knew the setting, and I'm not used to writing with an outline. So I knew what I had to make happen. And it was easier for me in some ways. My writers, I think, were more stressed than I was because we didn't want to have one style of writing, but they were all sort of trying to sound like me, kind of. But each of them brought their own strengths to it as well. But particularly in the first year when we were inventing a new kind of writing and a new style, I rewrote some of them possibly a little more heavily than they would have liked because I wanted it to sound more consistent, or because some of them, for instance, wrote wonderful Riverside characters. The poor characters they were great at. They weren't very good at the nobles. Some of them were great at the nobles, but they would make the Riverside characters sound English. And the whole point is they're not supposed to sound English. So as I was telling you earlier today, I'm good at dialogue. Dialogue to me really conveys the character. So often I would simply rewrite dialogue so that it sounded more the way it sounds in my world. That was the biggest rewriting that I did. And sometimes I would just be gobsmacked at what good writers they were, that they could do things I could never do. Some of them were brilliant at plot. Some of them wrote scenes that made me cry. They were so sad and beautiful, sexy. It was just a privilege getting to work with all these writers and being this one giant brain pool together.
It sounds great. I'm sure it was frustrating as well, but it sounds absolutely wonderful. Do you think it's something that we'll see more in years to come?
From my work, I don't know. We by the time we finished, it's also very hard work, and everyone found that they had spent more hours per month on this project than they had thought they would have to. And these are all working writers, so it really asked a lot of them. But now we talk and we say, we really miss it. We miss doing something together. Maybe we should think of something else we could do together. I don't know. We'll see.
Do you think it's something we'll see more in the reading and writing world in general, not just in your creation?
This little company that began as Serial Box continued. And there are many, many more of these serials besides the one I wrote. And Max Gladstone, I don't know, is he translated yet? He's a wonderful writer who's also a gamer, because there's also an aspect of gaming to these, in that you're creating these little nuggets and plots and interwoven events. And he invented quite a few of them. They're wonderful. Book Burners is one that I particularly love. And there's one about the Cold War, but with magic. They're terrific. So they kept doing more and more and more of them. So they're all there by wonderful writers. And now the company has changed its name and is focusing more on the audio. But I'm still telling you, there are probably 50 such stories that you can read. Mm-hmm. And they're now calling themselves, the company's now called Realm, Realm. So go to realm.com and have a good time.
Thank you. Would you recommend experience to other authors? If someone comes and tell you, well, I'm going to do a serial, I'm thinking of doing a serial, would you recommend it?
You know, it's funny because people do come to me and ask me. And it depends on who the other writers are. It depends on what your temperament is. Do you like to play with other people? Actually, we say, what we used to say about children when you got your report sent home from school was, does not play well with others, or plays well with others. And there were some writers that I really would have liked to have used in it, but I remember talking about them and with my boss and going, does not play well with others. You have to have a certain flexibility and think that it's fun. I had two people who are primarily writers in theater do it. Writers in theater can change anything like that. They're not too emotional about, but I wrote it this way. It has to be that way. They go, oh, you want it to be different? Okay, I'll make it different. I recommend theater people for this kind of work.
We have our first question, a couple of questions from the audience, and it's a good place to make a bit of a stop to my questions. Merav asks, it seems like you like the interactions with your fans. Do you remember any kind of instances about interactions with fans that you would like to share that made an imprint?
Constantly. There's so many that I'd have to really think. I mean, when people say things to me about the books that make it clear that they love them, that they understand them, or more that it's helped them. The thing that matters the most to me as a human being is to feel like I'm doing some good with my work. And, you know, writing stories about homosexual swordsmen doesn't really seem like it would be anything that would, contribute to the reparation of the world.
But
people tell me that the books have meant a lot to them, made it easier for them to come out, made it easier for them to understand gay relatives, made it easier for them to be teenagers. And I always want to cry when I hear that, because people are very sincere, and it's something I never expect to hear and that I've heard more than once. It's really valuable and beautiful to me. I love fan art. It's a huge kick to me to see someone make my characters look real. I can't draw, so I would never do it. Somebody did a t-shirt once. It's exciting. It's exciting.
There are some wonderful, wonderful Riverside fan art. I was browsing them back when I was working for Graf, and there were tons and tons of creation. Absolutely, absolutely beautiful.
There's a new one that just got up on Twitter last week that is fantastic. I retweeted it, but I'll retweet it again so people can see it. I'm just so impressed.
I'll go over your retweets and I will retweet it.
Do you know what it is? Why I love it? It's because it's not just the people. Very often, people who do fan art just draw the characters, and that's fine. But this is the characters in a city, and I like to see the whole scenario, and I don't see that very often. And I just loved it because it made it feel very real to me.
I must say, not being a gay boy myself, that I love your women writing, and they influenced me a lot. Certainly, Cops people. I always refer to them as Cops people. Sorry, because I can't remember their proper name, and they're being matriarchy. I love it. Anyway, I'm reading a question. Just a second. Dina Feynman wants to know, she says, I have a feeling you like writing about food. Does it come naturally to you, or do you make a conscious effort?
Oh, I love writing about food because I love to eat food. You know, this is the thing, again, what you love the most is going to turn up in your writing. Yeah, I do not make an effort. I like to write about food. I like to eat food. I like to think about food. There's some things that do not turn up in my writing, and it's probably because I find them not interesting, or I will put them in because I have to make it a more realistic world, but it's not something that I think that much about. Oh, clever. Who was that again?
Dina Feynman.
Okay. I thought for a moment
I bet you've met her.
Okay.
Dear Dina and everyone, go ahead, read Tremontaine, and if you can read a couple of episodes or listen to a couple of episodes without melting chocolate inside cream, you're heartless. You're absolutely heartless.
Oh, I forgot to say that the plot of Tremontaine involves the chocolate trade. One of the things we wanted to do in Tremontaine was bring in more of not only bring in foreigners and people of color, but bring in more of the middle class, the merchant class. And it turns out, I mean, people kept saying, how can this be a plot to a fantasy novel? It's basically about, utility trading, but it worked out really well, partly because of the characters. And so it's about trading chocolate. It's about selling chocolate. It's about drinking chocolate. It's about not drinking chocolate. And just about everybody says that it's almost impossible to read it without desperately wanting to drink hot chocolate. And some of the, what do you call it?
Drinking chocolate black. It's about drinking chocolate with cream and sugar. It's about drinking chocolate
without cream.
Yeah.
Without cream. The other thing we did when we were writing Tremontaine in my house was I felt very strongly that I had to provide the Riverside style of chocolate. And so I got dark chocolate and melted it in water and then had a pitcher of cream and some sugar. But I'll tell you, drinking that stuff black, it's a great buzz and it tastes really good to an adult, sophisticated palate. It's kind of like drinking black coffee. I recommend it. I really do. I thought, I'll get Mexican chocolate, but Mexican chocolate already comes with sugar and cinnamon and sometimes also with milk powder. So it's good, but it doesn't give you that. I've always wanted to know, what did just black chocolate drink in very small cups? I served it in espresso cups, very elegant and beautiful espresso cups, and made all of my writers drink it.
Did you shave the chocolate?
I don't think I did. I think I melted it on the stove. You have to stir all the time.
I kept listening to these parts, and I have to go and listen again because I missed anything beside the chocolate.
That's good. Now I want some. Oh no. All right. Can we talk about something else?
Yes, let's talk about apples. Just kidding. Okay, that's the end of this couple of questions. People do ask. We have the questions box below our heads.
Out of time.
Yes, we are almost out of time. And I really want to talk about the golden dreidel.
Okay.
Okay. So the golden dreidel.
Yeah.
If I got that correctly, I hope I had, it's a story and an album based on a klezmer stage show.
Pretty much, yes. Here's what happened. I used to have a radio program in America. And in fact, if you can hear some of my old episodes on my website again. And so there was a klezmer band in Boston where I was working and living that had a really good idea, which was to take the dances from the Nutcracker Suite by Tchaikovsky, which are all ethnic dances to begin with, and to play them, to orchestrate and play them as klezmer. Now, obviously, you know, not all of the ethnos in them were klezmer, but they were all folk tunes. And so they made them folk again and made them klezmer and turned them upside down so that the delicate dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy is played on the tuba. So it's really quite good music. And it's also hilariously funny if you've heard the Nutcracker Suite as many times as people in America have. So we wanted to put together a program to do together on stage. We were offered some money to do this for a festival. And so we decided I was going to write a story that would be like the Nutcracker. Let me just ask you, as Israelis, is this familiar to you?
The Nutcracker?
Yeah, the Nutcracker.
Ballet, yeah, most different, yeah.
Okay. It's everywhere here, you know, in America and England. So that I would write one, but that it would be Jewish, and that I would take all of the conventions of the Nutcracker story and turn them into something Jewish. So I made it a modern girl, and I also made it more feminist. And so it's a modern girl at a Hanukkah party, and her aunt, who is in fact Miriam HaNeviah, although I don't say that, comes and gives her this golden, instead of giving her a Nutcracker toy, gives her a dreidel, who is not a prince, but a princess, and takes her into a magical world. And the magical world is full of folklore, but it's all Jewish folklore. So we did it, and it's me reading, and the band is playing, and we did it on stage, and then we recorded it to be a radio program. And then the radio program recording, we sold to a record company, and they put it out. And that is available on Spotify. You know Spotify?
Yeah, sure, of course.
The album is out of print. I mean, nobody makes CDs anymore, but Spotify has the golden dreidel.
With the stories.
With me telling the story. Yeah. I think they have the original with no talking as well, but I'm pretty sure they do. But then they also have me telling the story. Your kids will love it if they have English. A lot of my friends said their children, even their older children, really loved it. So it's a little bit like Peter and the Wolf, you know, there's storytelling and music, and they mix together. So then someone asked me, would I do it as a book? And so I wrote it as a book, and it got published about 10 years ago, and not very much happened with that. And now the same publisher brought it out again with new illustrations and changed the spelling, because I think people felt that when I spelled it originally, it was almost more of a Yiddish spelling, more unusual, Dreydel. And now for the reprint with the new edition of the book, it's Dreidel, something like that. Yeah. Oh, there was a play in there too. I actually did. Someone said, did you want to write a play? And I was thinking, did I write a play? I did. I did it as a children's play in New York City for a children's theater company. But anyway, the latest is that just a couple of weeks ago, the new edition of the book in English with new illustrations is now available. Ellen Kouchner, The Golden Dreidel, Dreidel, I think. And I never thought that it would keep coming back the way it has. So that's been a big thrill.
That's what golden dreidels do.
I guess so.
Come back. Dreidel is Rivon for any of us who doesn't know English Hebrew words. So my fellow
English, it's Yiddish. It's Yiddish. Dreidel.
Yiddish, right? Yiddish.
Right.
Not many of us know nearly enough Yiddish, I must say. So my dear fellow Israelis, if you want a kosher Hebrew Jewish version of the Nutcracker with Alan Kouchner written all the stories, and the Klezmer band recorded all the music. I know I'm going to get it to my girls. Do we have any kind of last question? Yes, a last question from Rotem Baruchi, my friend and a very, very good writer, very good author. Do you ever think of making Sword Point a play?
Yes, I would not only love for Swords Point to be a play, but some good friends of mine who work in New York in theater, one of whom was one of my Tremontaine writers, Joel Derfner, are trying to write a Swords Point musical.
Oh dear.
And they sometimes they will let me talk to them about it, and sometimes they don't want me to interfere. But God willing, this will actually happen. I would love it.
My fingers are crossed because
I have a new agent, and I've begged her to do her very best to see if someone in Hollywood will buy the series to make it into a really good Netflix series or something, because I really wish that would happen.
I would so love that. I've just fell so deeply into Shadow and Bones Netflix series.
Very good.
And that was such a good adaptation that I have a renewed hope for adaptations. Seeing that there can be an adaptation with the author actually involved in, and all the people coming from the love of the book, not just making lots of money, which is, we probably will make a lot of money. Okay, so we ran out of time, and I want to thank you again so much for spending your afternoon with us. It was so much fun to hear you read and to listen about all your uniqueness.
Thank you so much for asking unusual questions that people don't usually ask me. And thank you for letting me join everybody at Eikon. By the way, it's probably really annoying that you can't see what my little pin says. So here is the pin I have.
Vaccinated.
Okay, stay well.
Thank you so much. Stay well as well.